After his defeat at Gergovia, Julius Caesar found himself at a pivotal moment in his campaign in Gaul. The Gallic tribes were more unified than ever, their morale bolstered by the recent Roman failure. Caesar knew that he had to act swiftly to regain control of the situation. Gergovia had shown his enemies that Rome was not invincible, and whispers of rebellion spread across Gaul like wildfire. If he was to maintain his grip over this vast and challenging land, Caesar needed a bold, strategic victory to reassert Roman dominance. His eyes fell upon Lutetia, a key stronghold of the Parisii tribe, which held both strategic and symbolic importance. Lutetia, a settlement on an island in the river Seine, was the heart of the Parisii, one of the tribes that had chosen to ally with Vercingetorix and oppose Roman rule. Situated where the Seine River narrowed, it provided a natural defence, with marshes surrounding its approaches. This ancient city stood as a symbol of resistance for the Gauls, and taking it would send a powerful message to those tribes still contemplating rebellion. The city not only controlled important trade routes, but also offered a psychological advantage. By conquering Lutetia, Caesar could undermine the confidence of the Gallic forces and dissuade them from further resistance. Caesar's decision to target Lutetia was a calculated one. After the setback at Gergovia, he needed to shift the momentum back in his favour. He knew that if he could capture Lutetia, it would deal a heavy blow to the Gallic rebellion and reaffirm Roman power in the region. Moreover, controlling Lutetia meant controlling one of the most important waterways in Gaul, giving him a strategic advantage that would serve him in future campaigns. The Parisii were well aware of the threat posed by Caesar's legions. Their leader, Camulogenus, an experienced and respected war chief, had already begun preparing the city for a Roman siege. Camulogenus knew that the Parisii could not stand against Caesar's forces in open battle. So he devised a strategy that would take advantage of Lutetia's natural defences. The island city, with its marshes and rivers, was nearly impregnable. If the Romans wanted to take Lutetia, they would have to wade through difficult terrain, all while under constant attack from Parisii warriors who knew the land intimately. But Caesar, too, was a master of strategy. He understood that a prolonged siege might cost him more than he was willing to pay. The Gallic tribes were still watching him closely, and any sign of weakness could spark a full-scale rebellion. Caesar's genius lay in his ability to adapt to any situation, and he quickly devised a plan to force Camulogenus into open battle. Caesar knew that the marshes and rivers surrounding Lutetia posed a challenge, but he had faced worse before. He ordered his engineers to construct makeshift bridges over the marshes and to clear paths through the dense foliage that surrounded the city. His legions, disciplined and experienced, worked tirelessly to prepare the ground for battle. Caesar's strategy was simple. He would draw the Parisii out of their stronghold and into a fight on open ground, where the discipline and training of his soldiers would give him a decisive advantage. To provoke Camulogenus, Caesar began marching his legions closer to the city, building camps at strategic locations around Lutetia. The Parisii, seeing the Roman threat advancing on their city, were forced to act. Camulogenus knew that he could not afford to let the Romans take Lutetia without a fight. His warriors were proud, and they were not willing to see their city fall to foreign invaders. Reluctantly, Camulogenus made the decision to meet Caesar's forces in battle. The Parisii warriors were formidable opponents. They were skilled in guerrilla tactics, often launching hit-and-run attacks against Roman forces. As Caesar's legions advanced through the marshes, the Parisii used their knowledge of the terrain to harass the Romans, striking swiftly before retreating into the safety of the swamps. Caesar's soldiers, weighed down by their heavy armour and shields, struggled to keep pace with their elusive enemies. The marshes were treacherous, and more than a few Roman soldiers found themselves stuck in the mud, easy prey for the Parisii warriors. Despite these early setbacks, Caesar pressed on. He knew that the key to victory was patience. The Parisii might have the advantage in the marshes, but they could not hold out forever. Caesar's legions were well-trained and highly disciplined, and he trusted in their ability to adapt to the difficult conditions. Slowly but surely, the Romans began to gain the upper hand. Caesar's engineers continued to build bridges and clear paths through the marshes, allowing his legions to advance more easily. As the Roman forces closed in on Lutetia, the Parisii were forced to make a final stand. Camulogenus, realizing that his hit-and-run tactics were no longer effective, gathered his warriors for a decisive battle. He chose his battlefield carefully, positioning his forces on a high ridge overlooking the Roman approach. The ridge provided a natural advantage, giving the Parisii the high ground from which to launch their attack. Camulogenus knew that if he could hold the ridge, he might be able to stop the Roman advance and save Lutetia from falling into enemy hands. The Battle of Lutetia was about to begin. Caesar, ever the strategist, recognized the importance of the ridge. If he allowed the Parisii to hold the high ground, it would make the Roman advance far more difficult. He ordered his legions to prepare for an uphill assault, knowing that it would be one of the most challenging battles they had faced so far in the Gallic campaign. The Roman legions formed up in their traditional lines, shields locked together in a nearly impenetrable wall of defence. The Parisii, meanwhile, prepared for a more chaotic, aggressive charge. Unlike the disciplined Romans, the Parisii relied on brute strength and ferocity to break their enemies. Armed with long spears and oval shields, they waited for the signal from Camulogenus to begin their attack. The battle began with a thunderous roar as the Parisii charged down the ridge, their war cries echoing across the battlefield. Caesar's legions held their ground, using their shields to absorb the initial impact of the charge. The Parisii warriors crashed against the Roman lines like waves against a cliff, but the Romans did not falter. Slowly, methodically, they began to push back, using their short swords to cut down the Parisii at close range. The fighting was brutal, with neither side willing to give an inch. The Parisii, driven by their desire to protect their homeland, fought with incredible ferocity. But Caesar's legions, hardened by years of warfare, were relentless. Despite the difficult terrain and the determination of their enemies, the Romans began to gain the upper hand. The Parisii, unable to break through the Roman lines, started to tire. Caesar, sensing that the tide was turning in his favour, ordered a full advance. The final moments of the battle were a slaughter. Caesar's legions surged forward, cutting through the Parisii ranks with ruthless efficiency. Camulogenus, realizing that the battle was lost, attempted to rally his forces for one last stand. But it was too late. The Parisii, surrounded and outnumbered, were cut down as they tried to retreat back to the safety of Lutetia. The high ground, which had seemed like an advantage at the start of the battle, became a trap for the Parisii as the Romans closed in from all sides. As the battle drew to a close, Caesar stood victorious once again. Lutetia, the stronghold of the Parisii, was now under Roman control. The Parisii, like so many other tribes before them, had been forced to submit to Roman rule. Camulogenus, their brave leader, had fallen in battle, and with his death, the last hope of resistance in Lutetia was extinguished. For Caesar, the capture of Lutetia was a critical victory. It restored his reputation after the setback at Gergovia and sent a clear message to the rest of Gaul. Resistance was futile. With Lutetia under Roman control, Caesar could now focus on the remaining rebellious tribes. But he knew that the Gallic War was far from over. Vercingetorix, the leader of the Arverni and the mastermind behind the rebellion, was still at large, and the final confrontation between Rome and the Gallic tribes was yet to come.